This video is brought to you by my Patreon supporters. The Concorde was one of the most iconic planes to ever fly. Its distinctive design and high performance cemented the plane in aviation history as one of two, as of 2021, passenger aircraft to fly faster than Mach 1, the speed of sound. For over 30 years, the Concorde would fly without fatal incident under its name. However, on July 25, 2000, this all changed. Upon takeoff at Paris Charles de Gaulle Airport, an Air France Concorde would burst into flames as it barely climbed. What caused this accident to happen? Why did Air France Flight 4590 crash at Paris? In the 1950s, jet airplanes took to the skies for the first time in civil aviation. Airplanes could now travel faster and higher than ever before. Passengers could be connected much quicker across oceans and continents. In the 1960s, the British Aerospace Corporation and Sud Aviation of France developed a new type of plane that was to enter commercial service. A plane that could fly faster than any other plane of its time and could cross the Atlantic Ocean in just 3 hours. Whereas other manufacturers developed planes for comfort and style, Concorde was developed with speed at the forefront. Concorde would become one of only 2 passenger planes that could travel at supersonic speeds, the other being the Soviet-built Tupolev 144, which made its first flight just 2 months before Concorde. Supersonic flight, in hindsight, proved to be not as popular as was expected. Despite multiple international airlines displaying interest in the plane, just 2 airlines would operate the plane long-term, these being British Airways and Air France. The only other airlines to operate the Concorde type included Braniff International, which ceased operations in 1980 due to high operating costs, and Singapore Airlines, which also operated a plane for a short while. A transatlantic flight on any normal aircraft could take upwards of 7 hours. Concorde, however, could perform the flight in around 3 hours. Concorde was also massive on fuel consumption, and as part of that, tickets were sold at a premium. A round trip on Concorde would cost at least $10,000, and that was at its time. Prior to 2000, there had not been a fatal incident involving the plane. In 1989, a British Airways Concorde had been involved in an accident where the plane suffered a structural failure. Part of the plane's rudder had broken off. The plane did land safely in that incident, was repaired, and returned to service. What is of note is a long list of incidents which includes 57 failures of Concorde's tires that had been recorded between 1976 and the accident flight of Flight 4590. It should be mentioned that a near-fatal crash of a Concorde occurred in 1979. Air France Flight 54 was a flight operating between Washington, D.C. and Paris. During takeoff, a tire from the undercarriage landing gear had burst, causing fragments of rubber to pierce 3 fuel tanks in the left wing. Jet fuel then began pouring out from the ruptured fuel tanks. A passenger on board noticed the obvious problem and a crew member was notified. The damage to the wing had also severed multiple electrical systems and caused the loss of 2 of the 3 hydraulic systems on the Concorde. The flight crew on that flight only just managed to land their plane safely with no fatalities, and with jet fuel still pouring from the ruptured fuel tanks. If you are familiar with the accident flight which occurred on July 25, 2000, this may sound familiar, as a similar occurrence would be the primary causal factor behind this accident. On the day of the accident of Air France Flight 4590, a total of 100 passengers would board the accident Concorde. The passengers were mostly German tourists, booked aboard a cruise ship later that day in New York. The plane was chartered by Peter Dielman Cruises, a German cruise operator who booked the passengers onto the flight. Air France Flight 4590's destination that day being New York's JFK Airport. On top of the 100 passengers, there were a further 9 crew members on the flight. The ones piloting the plane included 54-year-old Captain Christian Matti. Having accumulated over 13,000 flight hours, he is a senior captain at Air France. Having had experience on both the airline's Boeing and Airbus aircraft, he was still new to Concorde at the time with just 317 hours logged on the plane. His co-pilot was more experienced on Concorde. 50-year-old First Officer Jean Marcotte had accumulated over 10,000 flight hours by the time of the accident. The third member of the crew was the flight engineer, 58-year-old Gilles Jordanad, the eldest member of the crew with over 12,500 flight hours experience. Flight 4590 that day was to be flown by the plane registered as Foxtrot Bravo Tango Sierra Charlie, and at 2:07 p.m. local time, air traffic control gave Flight 4590 startup clearance. The Concorde was given instructions to taxi out to runway 26 right on the south side of Charles de Gaulle Airport. Ahead of Flight 4590, another plane departed from the same runway 5 minutes before the Concorde would take off from. Continental Airlines Flight 55 is also making a transatlantic flight heading to Newark Airport. The plane is a McDonnell Douglas DC-10, and this plane played a critical role in the following minutes. As the DC-10 was cleared for takeoff and was rolling down the runway, part of the right side number 3 engine had broken off. The piece was a titanium alloy around 17 inches long and just over 1 inch wide. The strip had broken off the thrust reverse cowling. It was part of the engine's skin. Interestingly, this plane and this piece of metal had been fitted as a replacement the previous month while the plane was in Tel Aviv, undergoing maintenance. Continental Airlines Flight 55 took off from Paris and continued its flight to Newark. The piece of metal it left behind sat there on the runway while Flight 4590, the Concorde, was preparing for its takeoff 5 minutes later. In that time, the piece of metal would not be noticed by any pilots, controllers, or ground staff. The Air France took position on runway 26 right. As with any Concorde departure, it drew spectators. To many, watching the takeoff of a Concorde was an event in and of its own. The time was now 2:40 in the afternoon. The controller handling Flight 4590 gives takeoff clearance at 2:42. The plane's 4 engines were then powered up as the plane started rolling down the runway. Captain Martin is at the flight controls performing the takeoff, while First Officer Marcotte is officially the pilot not flying, but handling radio communication and making the speed callouts. 24 seconds after takeoff clearance was received, the callout of 100 knots was made, as was the V1 callout. There was also another callout to verify that all engines were running normally. As already discussed in previous videos, V1 is a speed which pilots often associate with being a point of no return. Once passing this speed, you are committed to take off, as aborting now would be unsafe. As Concorde travels faster than most other planes, and because of its unique design, the plane requires a much faster speed before it lifts off, therefore a higher V1 speed, using up more runway. At 2:43 p.m., as Concorde was still rolling down the runway, the left undercarriage landing gear runs over the metal alloy strip that was left behind by the previously departing DC-10. In this moment, the number 2 tire on this section of the landing gear burst and was destroyed. It is believed that just like the tire incidents that came before Flight 4590, one or more fragments of the tire struck the underside of the wing. Tests carried out after the accident suggest that tire fragments were moving at a speed around 75 meters per second when the tire burst. Concorde's wings, much like other planes, house fuel tanks. There are a total of 13 fuel tanks on board Concorde. Tanks numbered 1 through 4 feed fuel into the plane's engines. The other tanks store fuel for use later to be transferred into the engine feeder tanks. In this case of a tire failure, it was one of these storage tanks, tank number 5 highlighted here, which was affected. Though these tire fragments didn't pierce the wing directly, it did rupture this fuel tank, causing fuel to leak. The violent nature of this force caused fuel tank number 5 to rupture. As the accident report describes, the tank was destroyed by this impact. As a result, an exorbitant amount of fuel began pouring from the wing. A loss of thrust on the 2 left side number 1 and 2 engines was noted in the accident report. As fuel was now leaking from the ruptured tank, the exposed fuel ignites due to extreme heat coming from this part of the plane. The investigation also stated that fuel could have ignited from electrical arcing in the plane's landing gear system. Having already passed V1 speed, the flight crew are now committed to takeoff. The plane now needed to take off with its left wing engulfed in flames. Air traffic control informed the crew of Flight 4590 of flames coming from their left wing, as it was clearly observed from the ground. On the flight deck, the plane left the ground at 2:43 and 13 seconds. The flight engineer noted that the number 2 engine had failed. 9 seconds after takeoff, a fire alarm had sounded warning the pilots the plane's engines were on fire. As such, the captain ordered the shutdown of the affected engines through the appropriate checklists. The captain also called for the landing gear to be retracted, but the system was now unresponsive. First Officer Marcotte suggests an immediate diversion to Le Bourget Airport. Le Bourget is a general aviation airport located just a few miles from Charles de Gaulle. The crew would only have to make a small turn to the left and be lined up with a runway there. The Concorde plane, however, just can't be controlled effectively. The pilots were left in a hopeless situation as their plane had been left uncontrollable. The plane would fly for just a few miles beyond the airport boundaries before losing altitude. The Hôtellissimo Hotel was located just ahead of the plane's flight path, next to the Paris commune of Gonesse. Air France Flight 4590 soon crashed directly into this hotel. Both the aircraft and the hotel were completely destroyed in the disaster. All 109 people on board the Concorde plane were killed, as were 4 on the ground and a further 6 injured. The crash of Concorde quickly circulated around the world and became headline news. It would become the first and only incident that the Concorde fleet would ever see. This pinnacle of aviation was brought into question as the Concorde's future looked uncertain, as its reputation had now been somewhat diminished by the incident. Air France retired their Concordes in June of 2003, with British Airways retiring theirs a few months later in October. From then, Concorde would never fly again. As for the investigation into Flight 4590, it was concluded that in this event, the primary causing factor was the plane running over a piece of metal belonging to another plane, which caused the tire to burst, rupturing the fuel tanks. The subsequent outpouring of fuel was ignited, causing the plane to erupt into flames. Some have stated that the previous incidents involving the Concorde's landing gear should have been more closely looked at, including the near-fatal incident which occurred many years prior. Some have said that more should have been done to prevent these tire failures from occurring again, and that these strings of incidents should have been enough to move Concorde into retirement much sooner. Some people have laid responsibility somewhat with the British and French manufacturers. The DC-10 aircraft involved was scrapped not long after the accident. A memorial now lays at the place where Flight 4590 came down on the Paris outskirts. Hello everyone, thanks so much for watching. This was a video that was previously only available on Patreon, but we had decided to put it out for everyone to see instead over the weekend. So if you found this video to be interesting, be sure to subscribe, as there will be another video this coming Saturday as normal. If you want to catch that video 48 hours early, you could join my Patreon from £3 per month, and the link to that will be in the pinned comment below. I'll not keep you here for long, as I myself am not very well today, but I will swiftly move on to thanking my amazing patrons for their amazing support. And there has been an increase in the number of people joining, so thanks to all who have recently joined. A thank you to the £5 tier patrons: Avery Tioda, Hunter Heilman, Hector Palmatellas, Jennifer Furketic, Joey, John Ambrosia, Ken Zachman, Kenneth Murrins, Len, Leon Sant Jennings, Marie Innes, MG, Michelle, Mom Left Me at Best Buy, MX Koifish, Pac-Man 7, Panic Chicken, Pedro Cruz, Pipsqueak, Rebecca Rivers, Rez, Rio Whitley, Saria Melody, Sleepy, Sue Shoes, TriStar Triforce, and Tristan Kriegsman. And big thanks to the generous £10 tier patrons for their incredible support: Aidan Montgomery, Anne Sid, Bard Ghost Isu, Derek Bean, Epsilon, Erin Wilson, Extreme Brooklyn Accent, Karma, Lily K. May, Megan Garrick, Mike Milton, Roger Mayer, So FP, Steve Cottrell, Thick Coconut, Vapronva, and Where Are My Cheetos? Thank you all so much. I'll be honest, I didn't think this many people would join, but thanks to everyone who has supported the channel. I can't thank you enough. We have just 2 more videos to go out this year, the last of which will be out on Christmas Day. Until Saturday though, that's it from me, and I will see you then. Goodbye.